Welcome back to Shine Total Wellness, where we talk about women's health topics that are relevant to fertility, prenatal, and postpartum wellness. So today we're going to be talking about seriously one of my favorite subjects, and it is PCOS. And okay, that's a weird thing to have as a favorite subject, but let me explain. PCOS is pretty much the reason that I decided to make women's health my full-time career, my main focus of my career. And I was working in traditional fertility at the time at a fertility clinic in Manhattan. And we were running blood tests and we were doing ultrasounds, essentially doing like a full fertility workup. And we were seeing all of the diagnostic criteria for PCOS so often, shockingly often. And the doctors weren't doing anything about it. And that was not okay with me. We were letting these people walk out of our office, not telling them that this is something that is definitely hindering your fertility and your overall health. And it's probably just going to lead to more chronic health conditions in the future. And so, long story short, I actually threatened to quit. I said, if we're not going to do anything about this, I don't understand why we're here working in medicine. We're not helping people. And so because I threatened to quit, we completely revamped our entire system. And I was able to sit down and work with women one-on-one as a holistic health coach, as a nutritional counselor, specifically based on what we were seeing in their labs. And that was wonderful. And it made me realize how prevalent PCOS and other hormonal health issues are for especially women who are, my age, millennials and younger, and how this is really going to continue impacting women in the future. So today, and again, I want to try to keep it short because I could talk about this literally all day, but we are going to dive into trying to conceive with PCOS, what to think about and what to start optimizing to set yourself up for greater chances of success. And I want to start with the caveat that PCOS is not an infertility diagnosis, okay? It does not mean that you're not going to be able to conceive, and it does not mean that you're going to be able to have a healthy pregnancy. However, unregulated PCOS does mean that it may be more difficult for you to conceive. It may be harder. It may take longer to conceive, and it can also impact egg quality. So before we get into what to kind of be aware of and what to optimize, let's talk about the 4 main root causes of PCOS, because it's really important to understand maybe where your PCOS is coming from so that you have a more targeted approach to correcting that imbalance. So the first type of PCOS is insulin resistance PCOS, and this is the one that people are most familiar with. This is the most common type of PCOS and the one that I also see most often. Now, with insulin resistance PCOS, high levels of insulin is essentially driving up androgens, especially testosterone, and that's throwing off sex hormones overall. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about what to do and where this comes from, but in the effort of keeping it short, the second type of PCOS is adrenal PCOS. And adrenal PCOS is definitely less common, but it is still out there. With adrenal PCOS, high levels of steroid hormones, especially DHEAS and cortisol, are throwing off sex hormone balance. And with adrenal PCOS, oftentimes insulin is normal. So a lot of people might think, okay, well, maybe it's not PCOS, or maybe they don't know that they have adrenal PCOS. Maybe they haven't done blood work at all. They're trying to reduce insulin, but your insulin is great, your glucose, your A1C are great. And so you're kind of working in a way that's counterproductive to what your body actually needs. The third type of PCOS is inflammatory PCOS, and this one is definitely becoming more common because chronic inflammation is something that's impacting so many Americans, more and more people on a daily basis. In this type of PCOS, inflammation is actually causing your ovaries to make more testosterone, throwing off your overall sex hormone balance. And the fourth root cause of PCOS is post-hormonal birth control PCOS. And this one is temporary. This one I don't necessarily see super often. When I do see it, I kind of put it in the category of what I call post-birth control syndrome. This one does tend to resolve itself, and it's something that happens when we come off of the hormonal birth control and we have what's called androgen rebound. So androgens, our male sex hormones, are temporarily a little more elevated while our body works to establish its prior hormone balance. Okay, so let's talk about some lifestyle factors that we can optimize to help support each type of PCOS. Now, with the most common type, insulin resistance PCOS, the number one thing that we're trying to do is drive down insulin. And insulin is a hormone that's secreted in our pancreas when our blood sugar, our glucose, is elevated. Now, our blood sugar is going to be elevated multiple times a day after we eat our meals, and then we secrete insulin. The insulin essentially takes the blood sugar and puts it into our cells, gets it out of our bloodstream so that we go back to a normal blood sugar level. Now, that's what's supposed to happen. But in the case of insulin resistance, blood sugar tends to be chronically elevated. Our insulin is being chronically pumped out by the pancreas. Our cells are full of sugar. So insulin is like the nosy neighbor that's knocking on the door of the cell 20 times a day. The cells are like, I'm full, go away. I don't want you to bother me anymore. They can't take in any more of that blood sugar. So it stays in the bloodstream. But because it's in the bloodstream, our pancreas keeps getting the message to pump out more insulin. So insulin remains high. Now, when insulin is chronically elevated, it can and will drive up androgens such as testosterone. And for women, we're supposed to have a small amount of baseline testosterone. We're not supposed to have zero testosterone. Testosterone is important. However, when it becomes too high, it gets in the way of other important sex hormone productions. So estrogen can be impacted, and progesterone is usually very significantly impacted by high androgens and testosterone. Now, with insulin resistance PCOS, the number one thing that we want to be on top of is managing our blood sugar. So with insulin resistance, it takes a little longer to get the cells to start responding to insulin again. It takes a little longer to drive blood sugar down. But a really, really crucial place to start is having balanced meals. So making sure you have some healthy fat, some protein, and some fiber with every meal. And if you're snacking, at least two of those components with every snack, because that's the winning combination for stable blood sugar. We want to make sure that we're not spiking blood sugar. So please, let's avoid the white carbs. Let's avoid the processed flours. And let's try to avoid sugars, especially added sugars like table sugar, cane sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and maltodextrin. Now, those are going to be in pretty much all packaged and processed foods. So yes, we're definitely moving towards a whole foods-based diet. So those are some simple ways to start stabilizing blood sugar, get you off that roller coaster, really get you off staying up here all the time, right? Some other things that can be really helpful nutrition-wise are going to be implementing some type of time-restricted feeding. Not all women respond well to intermittent fasting. I do find women with PCOS tend to respond better than a lot of other women do. It's a case-by-case basis. What I do always suggest, though, is just having a 12-hour reset between when you end eating at night and when you start eating the next day. And so that's not necessarily a fast. That's just a nice period of time when, first of all, your gut doesn't have to do any digesting work, so the gut can reset. But insulin can stay nice and low. So remember, insulin is lowering between meals when there's not as much sugar in your bloodstream. If we have that 12, maybe 12 plus hour stretch overnight, insulin is going to remain lower overnight. That gives some time when the cells are not constantly washed in insulin so that they can start becoming a little more sensitive to the effects of insulin when insulin comes knocking the next time, and a little less resistant. Now, going along with that, because we know that insulin is going to be elevated after eating, a lot of women with PCOS tend to do better with getting the nutrition, the calories they need at their main meals and doing less snacking. So maybe we're doing like 3 main meals a day, we're not snacking, or if we're doing a little more intensive time-restricted eating, we are playing around with intermittent fasting, maybe we're doing 2 main meals and 1 snack instead of the constant grazing, the constant snacking and nibbling and bites of this and that, that honestly a lot of Americans are doing. It's not great for our digestive system, but it's really also not great for metabolic health if you do have insulin resistance. And lastly, here, low to moderate carb diets are scientifically proven to be therapeutic for not only insulin resistance, but PCOS as well. So it doesn't mean that you need to go full on keto. Some women respond well to that, some women do not respond well to that. And it really does depend on other factors, especially your thyroid and adrenal status. However, we want to make sure that you're not getting too many carbs at one time. So for my women with PCOS, typically what I recommend is having 2 half-cup servings of overt carbohydrates per day. And the overt carbohydrates that I advise are going to be the starchy root vegetables like sweet potatoes, winter squash, plantains, yucca, even white potatoes, I'm okay with. They do have a lot more fiber. They're not necessarily like a true white carb. Or we want to go with a whole grain, brown rice, quinoa, teff, amaranth, that kind of thing. Now, a half-cup serving is about the size of a loose fist. It's not a huge serving, and a lot of us are eating significantly more carbohydrates than that in one sitting. I like to have those 2 half-cup servings spread out over 2 meals. And if you are eating breakfast, I always like to go with a low carb breakfast. So it doesn't have to be keto, doesn't have to be full on low carb, but let's avoid the carbs only in the morning. Instead, let's have lots of healthy fats, lots of protein, and a source of fiber like non-starchy vegetables, or maybe a half-cup of berries, a low sugar fruit, because our bodies can't respond as well to glucose in the morning. We do a little bit better with glucose in our system noon and later. For the second type, adrenal PCOS, this is going to be all about managing mental, emotional, and physical sources of stress in your life. So, DHEA and cortisol are both adrenal hormones that tend to be overproduced when we're under significant stress. Unfortunately, with our modern lives, most of us are under stress honestly 24/7 or pretty close to it. We are on all the time. We are not meant to be on 24/7. A lot of times, even when we're sleeping, our bodies are trying to work through stress. Our bodies are waking us up because of stress. We're having nightmares because of stress. We wake up immediately with that cortisol surge. So this is not how we're designed to operate. We're meant to respond to an acute stressor, deal with it, and then go back down to baseline, right? That chronic stress over time is where we run into problems. So, number one is going to be identifying the big sources of stress in your life. So, maybe we can't remove all of them. It would be amazing if we could, but very few of us can live a stress-free life. However, it's important to cultivate the right kind of tools for dealing with that stress so that you're not internalizing it and it's not turning into problems. You're able to manage and hopefully release it on a daily basis. Now, this can be a hobby that you really enjoy. It can be a form of exercise that isn't driving up cortisol, so restorative exercise. Yoga is really great. Walking outside in nature, getting some sunlight, getting some fresh air is really great for managing stress. For me, I love being around animals. I like horseback riding. I'm pregnant right now. I'm missing it so much. But normally, if I can just get on a horse twice a week or even just be around a horse twice a week, that really helps me with managing stress. I feel so much more focused and like I can handle anything. And then something else that's really, really important on a daily basis is going to be having some sort of grounding ritual wherever you need it most in the day. If you tend to wake up with a ton of stress, a ton of anxiety, and the racing mind, I would start the day with maybe some journaling, some meditation, some reading. If you need something a little more active to keep your mind off of the stress, it could be a creative outlet, adult coloring pages or knitting, something like that. Or maybe we're doing that at the end of the day so that we're managing stress on the back end and you're not taking it into your overnight sleep cycle. Now, in addition to addressing mental and emotional stressors in your life, it's also really important to figure out if physical stressors are adding to the high adrenal output. So, physical stressors can be in the form of chronic lack of sleep, right? Not getting enough sleep is going to put physical stress on your body. Most women tend to need more like 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And if you're in adrenal dysfunction, 9+ hours is probably the sweet spot that you're going for, at least for a period of time, so that your adrenals can recover. Now, quality is important when it comes to sleep. So, having proper sleep hygiene, winding down before bed, making sure that your sleep environment is optimized, all of these things are factors that I investigate very deeply with my clients. And we do work to optimize these up front because they can make such a big difference. And then, additionally, thinking about, is nutrition serving you when it comes to stress management? Are you going really long periods of time without eating? Are you eating balanced meals with that fat, protein, fiber combo? Or are you perhaps having a lot of sugar because of the cravings, having a lot of white carbs because of the cravings from that chronically elevated cortisol? I want my women who have any type of adrenal dysfunction, including adrenal PCOS, to have food coming in consistently. So you're eating breakfast within an hour of waking up every day. You're eating lunch and dinner at regular times. You're not going longer than 3 to 4 hours between meals without a balanced snack, because your body needs to know that it's got that nourishment coming in routinely. If not, that really can drive up cortisol for women. And another form of physical stress on the body is exercise. Yes, we know that many forms of exercise do increase cortisol. So, for a lot of people, we can handle that if cortisol is not chronically elevated. However, in the case of high adrenal output, the intense forms of exercise, especially long duration cardio. So, I'm looking at you, endurance marathon runners and triathletes, and HIIT cardio. That Peloton class where you're going all out 3 times a week. These are most likely not serving you. What's going to serve you better are going to be the restorative type exercises that actually help tame cortisol and nourish your adrenals. So, walking, especially outside in nature, yoga, Pilates, light strength training. These are the forms of exercise that are going to benefit women with adrenal PCOS. Remember, these things, while they might sound difficult to implement and difficult to overhaul in your life because they might be very different from what you're currently doing, they're usually temporary. We need to correct that underlying imbalance, and really we need to heal the adrenals. You are not going to heal high adrenal output by continually overproducing DHA and cortisol. That's just going to worsen the problem. Now, in the case of inflammatory PCOS, we're seeing this more and more because chronic inflammation is on the rise, and it's been on the rise, especially in Western countries, including America, for the last couple of decades. So what I always like to do with my clients with suspected or confirmed inflammatory PCOS is try to hone in on the root cause. Now, there's 3 main sources of inflammation in our modern lifestyle. Number 1, and this is the one that I see probably the most commonly, is poor gut health. So this has to do with an impaired intestinal lining, meaning we're eating foods where we're exposed to toxins and pollutants that are irritating to our gut lining. That gut lining is very, very thin. And essentially, once it's irritated, it can very easily become permeable or leaky. And you may have heard of leaky gut syndrome. This happens when those irritating food particles, especially gluten, dairy, added sugars, and vegetable oils, are routine in our diets, or we have a lot of environmental toxins and pollutants exposure. Now, when the gut is leaky, anything that we're eating, whether it's perfectly healthy foods or not, can leach outside of our intestines and get into other body tissues. And when that happens, we have a full-blown immune response. Our immune system sees those food particles, which should be harmless, as foreign invaders, and it mounts that response, which is very inflammatory. So you can imagine, if you're having that response 3+ times a day, every time you're eating, you're going to create systemic inflammation. So, and that's a very simple, there's so many other pathways that happen. That can also increase your brain inflammation. A lot of those inflammatory particles can cross the blood-brain barrier. But again, for the purpose of keeping it simple, because I could talk about this all day, That's essentially a cause of gut inflammation. Another cause is maybe you have allergens in your diet that you're not aware of. And a lot of times with leaky gut, you're going to be reacting to so many different things. They're not true allergens, but perhaps for a period of time, we need to move towards an anti-inflammatory diet so that we can heal that intestinal lining. We often need to support rebalancing the microbiome. And most of us have an overgrowth of bad gut bacteria and not enough of the good guys, the probiotics, to fight the bad guys off and really give us the digestive aid and the immune support that our microbiome is meant to. Now, in addition to that, we need to work on repairing the intestinal lining. So it's one thing to remove the irritating factors, but then we need to add in the foods and the supplements that support healing so that we can close those junctures in the intestinal lining to stop the leakiness in the first place. The second main cause of inflammation in our modern lifestyle is going to be chronic lack of sleep. And so many Americans are not getting the 8+ hours of sleep that they need. Now, I say 8+ because women need 8 to 9 hours. The studies that say that we need 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night, those were done exclusively on men, as most medical studies historically have been. Women are different. We're much more hormonally complex and complicated, and we do need more sleep as a result. So if you are chronically underslept, meaning you're not getting that 8+ hours, or maybe you're in bed for 8 hours, but you're tossing, you're turning, your sleep quality is poor, yes, that will certainly drive up inflammation. That will drive up insulin too. So a lot of these things are related to each other, right? And then the third source of chronic inflammation in our modern lifestyle is chronic stress. So we talked a lot about stress just a minute ago. All of those same things apply. We need to work on focusing on the main sources of stress, the emotional, mental, and physical sources, cutting down on what we can, and incorporating stress management techniques and outlets that are productive so that we're not holding on to and building up more stress on a daily basis. I'm not going to talk too much about the post-hormonal birth control PCOS in this video because, like I said, it is usually temporary. It's not usually one of the main sources of PCOS that I tend to see. However, anytime you're taking hormonal birth control, and especially when you're coming off of birth control, preparing for trying to conceive, we want to make sure that we are repleting the micronutrients that the birth control pill depletes, and it tends to deplete especially B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, selenium, and CoQ10. So we want to get these through food and or through supplements, depending on what your diet is typically like. We want to stick to an anti-inflammatory diet. We want to stay hydrated. And we also want to make sure that we're paying attention to addressing your stress, getting plenty of sleep. Essentially everything that we've been talking about prior is going to apply here to help with that healthy hormone rebound. Okay, so let's talk about some factors to consider when you are trying to conceive with PCOS, regardless of the type. So the timing of intercourse is usually a biggie for women with PCOS because obviously you need to time it right to be able to get pregnant. However, with PCOS, that typically comes with irregular cycles, cycles that are far apart. They're not the same number of days each month, if you're even having a cycle per month, and they might be completely absent for longer periods of time. So how on earth are you supposed to know when you're even fertile? Well, you should be working with a women's health expert, especially on your nutrition and lifestyle optimization, because that is going to help normalize your cycle so that they do become more predictable, right? And we can confirm that you're ovulating every month. That makes it so much easier for you to get pregnant. But in the meantime, I always recommend tracking LH, luteinizing hormone. And so LH is the hormone that peaks shortly before ovulation. Ovulation is when the egg is released from the follicle. Now, when we ovulate, that's when we're most fertile. So the best time to have intercourse for pregnancy is the 5 days leading up to ovulation plus the day of ovulation. So our fertile window is pretty short, right? We don't have that much of a chance of getting pregnant, even if you are cycling normally every month. With PCOS, I recommend if your periods are unpredictable or they're largely absent, get into the habit of taking that urine LH test on a daily basis. The best time to test your LH levels, it's not first thing in the morning. It's between about 10 a.m., like mid-morning, to early evening. And you can even test twice a day, once on the earlier side of that, once on the later side, because some women have very short LH surges and you don't want to miss your surge. Now, you might be testing, honestly, even for months on end, and you might never get an LH surge. This is not all for naught, because that is still really valuable information. Like, you are not ovulating, you are not getting that LH surge. That means you especially need to seek out help from a professional who can help you manage your PCOS, and PCOS is reversible. And I see that happening all the time. Now, another thing to keep in mind with PCOS is that you might see multiple LH surges, and that's actually much more common with PCOS. That can be so confusing. Those multiple surges are happening because your body is trying to ovulate, right? It's gearing up to ovulate, but it doesn't actually happen. It's unsuccessful, so it might try again a couple days later or a week later. Now, this is where confirming ovulation is crucial. That LH surge alone does not mean that you have successfully ovulated. It just means that your body tried to. Your progesterone level 5 to 7 days after your LH peak is what is going to help us confirm if you ovulated. And so I always recommend testing your progesterone either through a blood test or a urine test 7 days after your LH peak. There are urine tests that you can do at home that are affordable. Prove is a great brand, so that if you have multiple peaks, you can test multiple times. And progesterone is crucial for ovulation. Progesterone is something that many women with PCOS are not producing enough of, and that is a root cause of the anovulation. The high androgens and high cortisol both tend to inhibit healthy progesterone production. So let's talk about how to support healthy progesterone production next. So let's keep in mind a couple things about progesterone. First of all, progesterone is a steroid hormone, just like all of our sex and adrenal hormones. And steroid hormones require cholesterol to be produced. So if your dietary cholesterol is low, meaning you're eating a mostly or exclusively plant-based diet, and your progesterone is low, I really do suggest reintroducing some type of animal foods into your diet. So maybe it's eggs, maybe it's wild-caught salmon. Like, you don't have to jump in with beef, but if your body is low in what it needs to make progesterone, you're not doing yourself any favors. Now, in addition to that, progesterone is greatly impacted by cortisol levels. That's because progesterone and cortisol, your main stress hormone, share the same parent hormone, pregnenolone. So it's called pregnenolone steal. And essentially what this means is anytime there's a very high demand for cortisol, more of that pregnenolone is diverted towards the cortisol pathway and away from the progesterone pathway. So why would there be an increased demand for cortisol? Well, you're chronically overstressed, right? And most of us are with our modern lives, which we talked about earlier. So this is where stress management and identifying the main sources of the mental, emotional, and physical stressors in your life, trying to reduce and better manage them, really become crucially important. Now, progesterone is crucial obviously for successful ovulation, but it's also critical for successful implantation and maintaining a healthy pregnancy. So we want progesterone levels to be sufficient to prevent your endometrial lining from shedding prematurely, so that that embryo can implant the fertilized egg, essentially, that then turns into the embryo by the time of implantation. And if progesterone levels are not sufficient, that's usually not going to happen. We also want your progesterone levels to be high enough that your luteal phase is nice and long, minimum 10 days, but a 12 to 14 day luteal phase is going to lead to a much more successful rate of pregnancy. If your progesterone is not high enough, your luteal phase tends to be on the shorter end. There's not enough time for that embryo to implant. So maybe the egg was fertilized, maybe you would be able to get pregnant, but and the endometrial lining sheds because the egg doesn't get to implant. So there's no cue to your body to keep that endometrial lining. So for these and so many of reasons, progesterone is absolutely critical to a successful conception and a viable, healthy pregnancy. Now, the placenta will take over progesterone production around week 10 to 11 of pregnancy, but we have to get you there first. So, how do we support healthy progesterone levels naturally? Well, in addition to doing everything that we discussed with each of the PCOS subtypes, so the insulin resistance, the adrenal, and the inflammatory PCOS subtypes, there are some other lifestyle factors to consider. So, number one is that stress management that we discussed. And I really, really see that being critical. We have to drive cortisol down. We have to give your body a chance to make enough progesterone. And then as well as driving insulin down. I mean, those are like the two biggest things that I see as hindering progesterone. Now, with nutrition, vitamin C will aid in progesterone production. So, taking it either as a supplement or focusing on foods that are rich in vitamin C on a daily basis is going to be really helpful. This is especially important in your luteal phase. So, between ovulation and either getting that positive test or getting your period. However, if you have irregular cycles, you may not know exactly when that luteal phase is. There's absolutely no harm in getting a little extra, especially dietary vitamin C every single day. It has so many other benefits. So vitamin C foods, that is going to be, of course, your citrus, but maybe you want to avoid those high sugar fruits. So maybe we're focusing more on any type of berries, especially strawberries, dark leafy greens, crucifers like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, avocado. So really, most produce does contain some vitamin C. Those are the biggies. Now, we also want to make sure that you're getting the right kinds of healthy fats to support progesterone production. So omega-3 fats are going to be important. Of course, you can supplement, but they're going to be most bioavailable in especially wild-caught fatty fish. Go for the lower mercury fish. SMASH is a good acronym to keep in mind. So salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. And then river trout is really nice. Wild-caught cod and wild-caught halibut can be nice to supplement in there too. They're not quite as high as the others in omega-3s. We can get some plant-based omegas with ground flax seeds on a regular basis, walnuts, chia seeds. And then we want to make sure that you're getting healthy fats regularly throughout the day. So the sources of healthy fats that I consider to be especially helpful for progesterone production are going to be grass-fed ghee, grass-fed butter if you tolerate dairy. Now, I prefer the ghee versus the butter because ghee does not have any milk protein. It doesn't have any lactose. So it's technically not a dairy. If you're following an anti-inflammatory diet and you're avoiding at least cow's milk dairy, ghee you can continue to use. You can sneak it in there. I also love avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oils. We want these in your diet with every meal, and we want at least a serving of healthy fats with every snack. You don't need to eat all of those, of course, with every meal, but I usually go for like 2 servings of healthy fats with a meal, 1 serving with a snack. As a rule of thumb, a serving of healthy fats is going to be a tablespoon of an oil-based fat, or we could do half of an avocado, 2 tablespoons of loose nuts or seeds, or 1 tablespoon of nut or seed butter. Now, again, making sure that you're getting maybe some quality animal foods in there for that cholesterol production will be helpful as well. There are some targeted supplements that can really, really help with increasing your progesterone levels naturally. I don't really want to get into supplementation in this video because I prefer to guide people one-on-one with supplements, and I prefer for you to have, someone, a practitioner working with you, because we want to take everything into account. I don't just like to throw out like, hey, take this and every person on the planet can benefit, because that's not necessarily true. Some people need things and some people don't. With supplements too, I think you should always be supervised, especially when it comes to the adaptogenic type supplements that can and will impact your sex hormones. The other thing to keep in mind with PCOS, of course, is going to be egg quality. And women that have PCOS tend to have a lot of eggs. They tend to mature quite a few follicles, and we see that on the ultrasounds. However, those eggs tend to be poorer quality, which means they're less likely to translate to a viable embryo. Now, egg quality has to do with so many different things. And of course, we want to work on the underlying root causes of your PCOS, and we want to correct those imbalances. But while we're doing that, it certainly cannot hurt to get lots of dietary antioxidants on a daily basis. So typically when I say antioxidants, people think fruits and vegetables. Yes, these are great. I want you to have, especially the low sugar fruits. Berries are going to be the highest fruit for antioxidant levels. And then lots of non-starchy vegetables, ideally 4+ cups of those per day. Going to be good. However, those are not the highest antioxidant foods that you can find. So herbs and spices are super rich in antioxidants, and they're also full of lots of other benefits. So they're anti-inflammatory, and really regardless of the type of PCOS you have, it's going to be causing inflammation, right? If you have the inflammatory type, yes, obviously. But if you've got the adrenal type, the DHEA and cortisol are pro-inflammatory hormones. If you've got the insulin resistance type, insulin creates quite a bit of inflammation in the body. So in addition to getting antioxidants from herbs and spices, we can help manage inflammation, and we can support healthy liver hormone detox. Your liver is one of the main areas where we metabolize excess hormones. Now, variety is key here. If you don't like certain ones, you don't have to eat them. But my top for anti-inflammatory are going to be things like turmeric, oregano, parsley, cilantro, ginger, garlic, rosemary, cinnamon. I mean, there's so many. And I'm sure I missed a few because I'm just kind of saying these off the top of my head. But try to add a couple throughout really the day when you're cooking your food, like fresh herbs, dried herbs, powdered, any form, and spices, any form that you like them in. And then also, we want to avoid the substances that are known to impair egg quality. So really some biggies to be aware of are going to be alcohol and caffeine. Obviously, if you're in that 2-week wait, you're not going to be drinking alcohol probably, but the caffeine, that's one that people are like, oh, I can't let go of it. So consider switching your coffee to green tea or matcha. And these I actually continue to keep in my diet when I'm trying to conceive and when I'm pregnant, not only for a little bit of energy boost. When you're pregnant, you're so tired, you don't even really feel it. But the antioxidant load of green tea, and especially matcha, is so significant and can be really beneficial for egg quality. And of course, they have much less caffeine than coffee would have. And teas also have, so the caffeinated teas, green, white, and black teas, also have natural L-theanine. And that's an amino acid that's very soothing. So it can buffer some of that cortisol spiking that coffee will tend to do, which is very important with any of the subsets of PCOS because of the inflammation, because of the impact on blood sugar. And obviously, if you have the adrenal type, you don't want your cortisol to be raised. In addition to the caffeine and alcohol that impact your egg quality, sugar, so especially man-made and processed sugars, try using natural sweeteners, things like honey and stevia, things like coconut sugar, things like fruit, and avoiding the unnatural man-made processed sugars as much as possible. And then recreational drugs, we want to avoid. They can and will negatively impact your egg quality, potentially even interact with sex hormones. It's very interesting. We have receptors for a lot of recreational drugs in our ovaries, so we don't exactly know how things are impacted, but we know that they are. And then environmental toxins and pollutants and endocrine disruptors are some more things to look out for when we're talking about improving egg quality. And of course, there are targeted supplements that help with egg quality too. And I can and do work with these. I just, again, don't like to give supplement advice that isn't one-on-one. So this was really a crash course in trying to conceive for PCOS. And I hope that it was informative to you. I know there's so much information out there, and a lot of it is so overwhelming. I tried to really cut through a lot of the unnecessary and unhelpful information that's out there so that you can get the facts that you need to focus on. And especially if you know the type of PCOS that you're dealing with, you can hone in a little better. Now, if you're like most women, you could use support, and really you should have support when you're trying to conceive with PCOS, and especially with someone who can focus on correcting that underlying imbalance first and then helping with the trying to conceive aspect second, so that you have better chances for success. So if you're interested, I will put some information about working with me in the notes below. And again, I really hope that you found this video easy to digest and informative. Thank you so much for watching. I would love it if you add a thumbs up. You can subscribe down here as well. And I will see you guys next time at Shine Total Wellness.